All right. So let's get started. Everybody, thanks so much for joining. My name is Angie Rupert. I am the founder of Rupert Law Group. We handle exclusively E2 and E1 visas. So no matter what treaty country you're from or where you want to be, we can help. And today we are taking your questions and answers, right? So we get lots and lots of leads every single day. Thank you to all of you who reach out to us to ask questions, talk about your E2 hopes and dreams. We are thrilled to speak with you and communicate with you. But today, some of you have questions that I'm just not able to answer due to time, due to restrictions, whatever. Sometimes questions come up a little bit later after we've already talked. And so today, I wanted to go over some common questions and then also some additional questions that you might have about your case or about a specific issue that you're having with your E2 visa. So with that, let's get started. The basics of the E2 are, right, that you need to have a substantial investment in a real and operating business that is not marginal in the United States. So let's talk a little bit about that. What does that mean exactly, right? So a substantial investment, now, actually, I want to take a quick step back to let you know that we do have specific videos over all of these different topics, right? However, we're going to just go over everything kind of as a general background today. If you want more information, please feel free to look at some of our other videos. They're going to dive a little bit deeper into our situation, into these specific things. But a substantial investment, what does that mean? We always recommend a minimum of $100,000 US invested in the United States. Keep in mind that investment is spent, right? Investment is not in a bank account. Investment is spent. So we need receipts totaling about $100,000 US. Now, I actually had a consultation earlier today with someone who was interested in purchasing a restaurant. Great idea. The restaurant was valued at approximately $700,000. And I said, okay, so you're probably in it for at least $500,000 or $600,000. And he said, what? I thought it was $100,000. It is a proportionality test, right? So the less expensive the business, higher proportion you need to invest. Our rule of thumb, if the business is valued at less than $300,000, you should invest the total amount that it costs to either purchase or start a business. The higher you go, the lower the proportion that you need to invest from personal funds. But just keep that in mind. And in no case do we ever recommend investing less than about $100,000. There is a mental break there that for the consular officers, because they're the ones that kind of make the decisions, right? Somebody who has spent six figures in order to get this business going is obviously dedicated and obviously has every intention for this business to work and will work really hard to make sure that their business in the United States is a success. And that's what they're looking for. That's why we recommend that. So, with that, I'm ready to take a couple of questions. Real estate investment. Here's the question. What about real estate investment? Could we buy an apartment building for the business? Not really. There's a couple of reasons why, right? So, first of all, you can do that without a visa. That's the main thing, right? You don't need to have a visa to own real estate in the United States. All right. So keep that in mind. That's number one. And that's what the consular officers always say. It's like, this is a passive investment. It's great. Congratulations on making a really good investment in the US. You don't need a visa to have it. Go back to your home country, and the manager will send you the checks every month from the tenants. Congrats. But no, it's not a business. So don't think of this as an investment in the United States. Think of it as an investment in a business in the United States. What does a business need? Employees, customers, clients, things like that. So if you're going to do a real estate based business, it's not going to be buying some piece of real estate and then that's the business. No, it's not that. One other reason that I never recommend buying real estate as part of an investment is because then it makes it very much more expensive, right? So let's just take an example of starting. Let's take it this way. Can we start an accounting firm, right? Very inexpensive to start. You need some computers, maybe you need an office space, that type of thing, right? So now, in order to get past the immigration hurdle, we're going to recommend that you invest about $100,000 in that. However, if you wanted to start an accounting firm and somehow you buy the real estate, Well, now the startup costs are going to be much, much higher. So now you have to invest a lot more. So I usually say it's okay to buy real estate, and that's fine, just not part of the E2 business, right? So you set up two LLCs or two C Corps. One is a holding company for the real estate, the other is the operational company. That's the one that has employees, customers, clients, delivers products, goods, services, that kind of thing. All right. So owning real estate is never an E2 visa. No. All right. So let's go on. Can I change from an ESTA to an E2 visa? Very simple answer. No, you can't. So ESTA, for those of you who are eligible for ESTA, right? And there are some, I don't know, I'm totally guessing 30 countries on the ESTA list, something like that. You fill out a very short form online, right? And you're eligible for ESTA if you fill this out. And that means you can come to the United States without a visa. You don't need to go to the consulate. You don't need to go to the embassy. You can come to the United States for about 90 days or for 90 days to do, vacations, visiting family, friends, that type of thing. And then you must return. The reason that those countries are eligible for ESTA is because they trust that you're not going to stay longer than the 90 days. And so when you come to the United States on ESTA, you have a hard out, a very hard out, and that is 90 days. If you overstay that, you will lose your ESTA and you cannot change status to any other status. You must return to your home country and apply from there. So hopefully that answers that question. How many employees if I buy a small franchise? So great question. A couple of things to think about, right? So what are you doing? Are you buying a new franchise, meaning you're going to start the franchise in the area of Sacramento, California, right? So there's franchises all over the place. There isn't one in Sacramento. You're starting a brand new one, right? It's like starting a new business, right? You pay the franchise fee, you find your location, a variety of different things. In that case, it's like starting a brand new business. And we always recommend that you have at least one US citizen or green card holder on payroll at the time of application, but it may make sense to have more. So in other words, there's no minimum, but it must make sense. So if you're starting a business and let's say you kind of set a few things up, you go back to your home country, the business starts operations, you're in your home country, right? You don't want to be here while the business is operational without an E2, but you're here or the business is operational, well, then you'll need however many employees that you need. So if you're starting some sort of, like, say, a restaurant franchise, you may need 8 or 10 employees at that time, whatever makes sense. You can't run a restaurant on one employee, right? That's a startup. And that would be the case if you started a new, as we talked about earlier, an accounting firm or um, a trucking service, right? Logistics, long haul trucking, short haul, different things, delivery, things like that. Okay. Anything. However, if you're purchasing a business that already exists, so let's say that you're going to do that same franchise in Sacramento, someone else was already owning it, operating it, but they decided it's time to retire. They're selling their franchise to you. It already works. It already is operational. They have revenues, they have payroll, they have all of that. Then you should keep on whoever it is that's currently on, right? To keep that thing operational and moving because you need to get a visa before you can come down and do any work in the business, right? You have to have a visa to do that. And so keep the employees exactly where they're at, running the business. That's exactly right. So that's that. Hopefully that kind of helps. But just to be clear, there are no minimums when it comes to the number of employees that you must have. There are no minimums. However, we always recommend at least one and more if more is what makes sense for your business. Okay, let's see. If I have a US business partner, can he or she also be the employee required? So, this really depends. Again, I really say that the E2 visa is really, this is why you need someone who does it a lot because there's not a lot of regulation. There's not a lot of very specifics, right? So one of the things that they require is that the business is not marginal. That is a requirement. It cannot be marginal. Now, what is the definition of marginal? Who knows, right? Everyone's definition is a little bit different. So in the case of marginality, that's where your business plan comes in. They want to see that you're going to produce goods, services, what have you, that you're going to have revenues. You can pay yourself, you can pay employees. Maybe you already have employees, you already have revenues, these types of things. That's the marginality requirement. So if you have a US business partner, it kind of depends, right? Because business partners know they're going to, in many cases, maybe they will take a salary, but then they're also going to take either a dividend payment or distribution from the company, profits at the end of the year or quarterly or whatever they've decided. So it's usually a good idea to have someone else on, right? Because the whole goal of the E2 visa is not only to invest in the United States, but also to hire US employees. These are the fundamental reasons why this visa exists. So always keep those in mind when you're doing whatever you're doing in the E2 visa process, right? They want you to invest in the US. They want you to hire employees. They want this business to be successful, generating revenues and employing US citizens and green card holders. So those are the kind of the overarching goals here. So when you're talking about, well, can I do this? Can I do that? The bare minimums, that kind of thing. Think about what the consular officer is thinking. Think about the basics of this visa, and that will kind of help guide you as far as what the answers are. Again, there really are no printed answers, but you have to always kind of keep the idea of the E2 visa in mind. And then, of course, what you really need to do is keep those requirements in mind. It's not marginal. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. What else do we have here? A variety. Placement. So there's a variety of different questions here about different types of businesses. The reality is, as long as a business is legal, it is for profit, you have customers or clients, and eventually you'll have employees, at least one, and then you're going to hire more, and you're going to have the revenues to support those. Generally, that's the only thing that they really care about is about what type of visa. So that means you can do service-based businesses, you could start something, you could buy something, you could do, goods, right? You could sell any kind of goods, importing goods, exporting goods, just selling them here within the United States, wholesale, retail. You could have any sort of food business or anything like that, service-based businesses. I mean, recently we've helped, I'm trying to think of some of the service-based businesses. We actually had an AI business approved yesterday, thankfully, in Canada. We've had a cleaning business. We have I was actually just talking about this with a consultation today about someone that does Airbnb management and staging, right? So sometimes people have an apartment or they have a house that they want to put on Airbnb, which is awesome, but it's not furnished. So this company furnished those things, made them look great. So people wanted to rent them out, managed it, with all types of things, putting them online, trying to rent them out, keeping track of reservations, paying the maintenance people, paying the lawn people, paying the cleaning people, these types of things. All of these things can work. We've had, let's see, oh my gosh, we just have so many, and now I'm like totally drawing a blank about other people that we have helped. But the point is, there really are no restrictions on the type of business other than they need to be for profit, no nonprofit designated businesses. Okay. You need to have customers or clients, not yourself, right? That's getting back to that real estate thing. Like you're the person that makes the money here, right? And you're delivering services to yourself or something like that, right? So you have to have customers or clients. It needs to be legal, obviously, and it needs to be for profit. And then, of course, it should be something that you enjoy. Other than that, the sky's the limit. So pick kind of whatever it is that you want to pick. Can my wife work in the E2 business, or does she need a separate E2 visa application? Here's the great news. When you come over as a spouse of an E2 applicant, either an investor or an employee, actually, that's something we should talk about as E2 employees, right? But if you were the spouse of an E2 investor, generally speaking, you're going to get approved, hopefully, on the same day that the investor gets approved at the interview at the US consulate or embassy in your home country, right? That's how it generally works. Once those passports come back to you with the E2 visas in it, you will fly to the United States, and you're both authorized to work Incident to status, that's the term. What that means is as soon as you get to the US, you can begin work right away. Now, the E2 investor must work only for the business printed on the visa. The name of the business that was approved for the E2 will be printed on the visa. That applicant must work only for that business. No other work is allowed. The spouse, though, will have a generic or a general work authorization, meaning he or she can work wherever or doesn't have to work at all, right? Doesn't need any kind of separate sponsorship to work at a place, can start his or her own business, could work for the E2 business, doesn't have to work at all. They have a lot of flexibility. So sometimes people take that into account depending on their current family situation, whatever. Sometimes people come over and maybe the wife they have small children and the wife wants to stay at home for a few years to take care of the children. And then the children end up going to school. That's fine. She hasn't worked for 3 years, but now she wants to start. That's very doable. So the spouse has a lot of flexibility. Now, in the old days, I say old days, I mean before November of 2021, the spouse would have to get to the United States, do a separate application for work authorization, and then could work, but no longer. They have changed that. So you're both eligible to work incident to status, right? So keep that in mind. Does the location you want to open the business matter for the investment needed and the jobs created? Do you recommend higher amounts of opening up a business in New York City or San Francisco than normal? Yeah, it could, because the reality is the amount needed to invest is what it costs to get a business operational. And a business that you're running in San Francisco and New York City and LA County, that type of thing is probably going to be more expensive than if you open it in Lincoln, Nebraska, right? For a multitude of reasons. Maybe the office space is much more expensive. It could be that you need special permits in those cities and those take more, all kinds of things. So yeah, the location could make a difference in the amount of the startup costs, which will ultimately make a difference in how much you need to invest in order to be considered a substantial investment, right? So something else to keep in mind. Let's see. Oh, this one is actually a really important question. Let me read this question. Dual citizen, my wife is from a non-treaty country. Could she apply as a dependent? So there have been some changes regarding applicants and spouses from different countries. That happened over this summer, okay? For many people, it doesn't affect anything, but let's talk a little bit about it. So first of all, let's use some examples because it's really hard when people just say a dual national and that type of thing. So let's say that you are a citizen of Canada and a citizen of Egypt, okay? You have dual citizenships, Canada and Egypt. Great. And you're married to someone who has a citizenship from Saudi Arabia. And that's the only citizenship of the person that you're married to, okay? So what you would do in that instance, you would look at the visa reciprocity. Of course, your attorney can tell you a little bit about this, but the Egypt reciprocity is for 3 months. Canada's reciprocity is for 5 years. So clearly you want to apply as a Canadian citizen, and you can do that, right? So you let them know, obviously, that you have the different citizenship, but the Canadian citizenship in this case will rule. Now, you're married to someone who has a passport from a non-treaty country. That's totally fine. The spouse who is a citizen of Saudi Arabia will be given the same reciprocity, meaning the visa will be good for the same length of time and the same number of entries as the treaty country applicant. So in this case, even though the spouse is actually from Saudi Arabia or a citizen of Saudi Arabia, he or she will get the same reciprocity as the Canadian applicant, okay? But here's where the change happened, okay? So let's take that again. Let's say that you are now a citizen of Canada and your spouse is a citizen of Australia, okay? It's going to be a little bit different. So in Canada, we talked about the length of time for the E2 visa is 5 years before renewal. In Australia, it is 4. So the difference here is you still will apply as the spouse of the Canadian citizen. However, you will only get the reciprocity for 4 years because you are a citizen of another treaty country. So if you are a citizen of a non-treaty country and you're a spouse, you're going to get the same treatment as that treaty country applicant spouse. But if you're a citizen of another treaty country, you will be given only 4 years in this instance, versus your spouse will have 5 years. Why did they do this? This is the mystery of the United States government. I have no idea. It will make things confusing. For that Canada, Australia example that I gave, maybe it's not that big of a deal. But what about the Canada, Egypt situation that I gave, right? So those visas are good for one entry, 3 months. You're eligible to stay in the US for 2 years, but that means your spouse is going to be applying all the time for renewals, even though the Canadian investor doesn't, it's fine. They're good for 5 years. They don't have to do anything. So it's kind of a pain. And as you may want to ask, well, what if it's the opposite? The Egyptians, the Egyptian is the applicant, and then the Canadian is the spouse. They just give you the least in that. You can never win, in other words, right? You're never going to have approval as a spouse for longer than the actual E2 applicant. But I know that's a little bit kind of crazy and confusing, and it doesn't affect that many of our clients. However, it can. But go back to the first question, if you are a citizen of a non-treaty country, but you are married to someone who is a citizen of a treaty country, everybody's good. You'll be given the same reciprocity if approved, okay? Okay, so I'm going to take one more and then we're going to wrap it up. However, if you have more questions, obviously you're going to want to reach out and we can talk with you about those. Can you buy a portion or equity of an existing running business, and can you apply for the E2? Yeah, you can. You can. Keep in mind that anytime you're buying a business, it needs to be appraised, right? Because what they don't want is they don't want to feel like, oh, this is just your best friend and this business is really worth $1 million, but he's giving you a 51% share for $150,000. That's no good, right? So you need to be paying the fair market value for the portion of the business that you buy. Keep in mind, you're always going to have a controlling interest in that business if you are applying as an E2 investor. So you'll need to have some sort of appraisal based on what is this business actually worth. And if I buy a 51% share, 51% of the shares of this business or the membership of this business, what is that appraised at? And then you need to pay the fair market value. Please do not buy things from relatives. Bad idea. Don't do that. You don't want to do that, okay? Because it goes right back to what we were talking about earlier, which is this doesn't feel legitimate. This feels like the brother wants to get the sister there, except for he doesn't want to wait, the 15 years it takes to file a green card for the sister. So he's kind of just doing her a favor and then she'll get here and do whatever she wants, right? That's sometimes the assumption. So please don't do that. Don't buy from siblings. It's usually a bad idea, or relatives for that matter, right? It's usually a bad idea. Let's keep these applications really good, really clean. We want to make sure that we meet all of those requirements and we don't have any questions at the interview. That's always the goal. So that's exactly what we do. So with that, we're going to wrap for today. Thank you all so much for your questions. Some great questions. And please reach out anytime. We'd love to help you with your E2 visa.